The halls of Casterly Rock had never been so silent. Not even after the death of Joanna Lannister had the great fortress seemed so still, so steeped in a grief that no one dared voice aloud. The queen had died. Cersei Lannister, the proud and cunning lioness of House Lannister, had bled out upon the birthing bed, her final breath stolen by the child she had fought so hard to bring into the world. Joffrey Baratheon had survived, but his mother had not. And with her death, the course of Westeros shifted in ways no one could yet predict. Tywin Lannister, for the second time in his life, stood at the edge of a bed stained with his wife's blood. Except this time, it was his daughter, his golden, headstrong daughter, who lay still and cold. The midwives were too afraid to speak. The Meesters muttered about complications, about fate, about things that Tywin had no patience for. He turned away from the corpse that had once been his legacy and looked at the wailing child wrapped in gold-threaded blankets. The child had taken his daughter from him, and now that child would belong to him. King Robert Baratheon was not a man of many feelings. He loved battle, he loved drinking, he loved whoring, but love for his wife, that had never existed. And yet, when word reached him of Cersei's death, something unexpected flickered in his drunken haze. Regret. He had never treated her well, had never tried to be the husband she had deserved. But she had been the queen, and she had been strong. Strong enough to keep the vipers of court at bay, to keep the Lannisters bound to the Iron Throne, to keep their sons shielded from Robert's own indifference. Now she was gone, and Robert, in his own selfish way, realized what that meant. "She's dead," he muttered, staring at Ned Stark across the table in the Red Keep. The words felt foreign in his mouth. "Cersei is dead." Ned, ever the loyal friend, inclined his head. "I am sorry, Robert." Robert only scoffed. "You think I loved her?" He poured himself another cup of wine, but for once he did not drink it. "But she was the mother of my heir. What am I supposed to do with a bloody babe?" "You raise him," Ned said simply, "as your father raised you." Robert barked out a bitter laugh. "My father died in battle, Ned. I was nearly a man grown." He leaned back, rubbing his face. "What do I do with a babe who barely knows my voice?" The answer came not from Ned, but from the letter that arrived that same night, a letter sealed with a crimson lion. Tywin Lannister had never been a patient man. He had suffered through years of being hand to the Mad King, had endured the insult of his daughter being wed to a drunken fool. He had swallowed his pride when Robert had taken the Iron Throne, because patience was a tool, a weapon to be wielded at the right moment. And now, the right moment had come. The letter to King's Landing was short and clear. Joffrey Baratheon was of Lannister blood. With his mother dead and his father an inattentive king, there was no reason for the child to remain in the capital. It was only fitting that he be sent to Casterly Rock, where Tywin would personally oversee his upbringing. Robert, ever a man who preferred to let others handle responsibility, agreed without much argument. And so, before he was even a year old, Joffrey Baratheon was sent west, away from the chaos of court, away from the whispered rumors of his illegitimacy, and into the hands of the most powerful man in Westeros. Under Tywin's rule, Joffrey was not the same boy he would have been under Cersei's indulgence. He was not spoiled with unchecked cruelty, not encouraged to act on his worst impulses. Tywin had no patience for weakness, and Joffrey learned that quickly. The boy was still vain, still proud, still quick to anger, but he was also disciplined. He learned to wield a sword from the best knights of the Westerlands, but he was taught restraint. He learned that ruling was more than just taking what you wanted, it was about control. Power was not won through petulance, it was secured through strategy. And Joffrey, with Tywin's firm hand guiding him, became something far more dangerous than the mad tyrant he was meant to be. He became a king worthy of fear. Without Cersei's scheming, without her quiet manipulation of events, the conflicts in King's Landing played out differently. When Jon Arryn died, it was not because Cersei had poisoned him, but because illness had finally taken him. Ned Stark still came south, but he did not find himself in a nest of Lannister vipers. Instead, he found a disinterested king and a council at odds with itself. There was no immediate plot to kill him. There was no queen regent whispering poison into the ears of fools. And so Ned had time. Time to uncover the truth that would have otherwise led to his downfall, that Joffrey was not Robert's son. When Ned Stark uncovered the truth, there was no emotional, reckless Joffrey sitting on the throne. There was no Cersei to order his execution in a fit of rage. Instead, there was Tywin Lannister, who understood the value of patience and silence. Tywin did not let the truth be spoken in court. He did not let the realm fracture under the weight of a bastard's birthright. Instead, he moved first. Ned Stark did not find himself in prison. Instead, he was called to a private audience. He was shown the might of House Lannister, the power of the wealthiest house in Westeros, and he was given a choice. Bend the knee and recognize Joffrey as king, or let the realm burn. Ned Stark, ever the honorable man, faced the hardest decision of his life. But when he looked at his daughters, when he thought of the bloodshed that would come from defying the most powerful man in the realm, he made a choice he never thought he would make. He bent the knee. With Ned Stark's loyalty secured, with the truth buried beneath gold and fear, Westeros did not fall into immediate war. There was no War of the Five Kings, no open rebellion. Instead, there was silence. But silence was never meant to last. Joffrey Baratheon, the lion raised by Tywin, ascended the throne upon Robert's sudden death in a hunting accident. He was not the boy king of the original timeline. He was not a mad tyrant. He was something worse. He was a Lannister through and through. And as the years passed, as he grew into his crown, the realm came to realize one simple truth. A king raised by a lion is far more dangerous than a king raised by a wolf. And Joffrey Baratheon was the deadliest lion of them all. The first year of Joffrey's rule was marked by order and discipline. Tywin Lannister stood beside the throne, his presence casting a long shadow over the young king. Unlike the spoiled boy tyrant he might have been, Joffrey had been molded into something different, a ruler who understood power and how to wield it. The realm did not fear him because of unpredictable cruelty. They feared him because they knew he was his grandfather's heir in more than name. Calculating, ruthless. He was not a king who killed for pleasure. He was a king who killed for purpose. Ned Stark had returned to Winterfell a changed man. He had spent months in King's Landing, standing at the edge of a precipice, knowing the truth about Joffrey's birth, but unable to act on it without plunging the realm into war. Instead of death, he had been given an offer: loyalty to Joffrey or the destruction of House Stark. And for his daughters, for his sons, he had done what he never thought he would. He had submitted. But the North was not blind. Rumors swirled of the boy king's true parentage. And though Ned had sworn himself to Joffrey's reign, there were those who whispered that he was merely waiting, watching. Because the moment Tywin Lannister died, the moment Joffrey ruled alone, the game would change, and the North would be ready. Across the narrow sea, a girl with silver hair and violet eyes was learning what it meant to be a queen. Daenerys Targaryen had wed Khal Drogo, had watched her brother perish, and now carried the embers of a dynasty in her hands. But the Westeros she dreamed of reclaiming was not the same one she had been told about. She had heard of Joffrey Baratheon, the boy king raised by the line of Lannister, a ruler not loved but respected, a ruler who did not waste time on decadence, but who instead forged alliances, strengthened his armies, and expanded the power of the throne. This was no foolish boy playing at war. This was an enemy she would have to face with fire and blood. Tywin Lannister had always known the value of marriage alliances. And so, when the time came to secure Joffrey's rule, he did not look to the south nor to the Reach. He looked to Dorne. House Martell had long nursed grudges against the Lannisters for the death of Elia Martell and her children during Robert's rebellion. But Tywin, ever the pragmatist, knew that grudges could be softened with the right offer. And so Joffrey Baratheon, first of his name, took as his wife Arianne Martell, the fiery and ambitious heir of Dorne. It was a marriage that stunned the realm. For decades, Dorne had stood apart, resisting the pull of the Iron Throne, never truly bending the knee. But now, with Arianne as queen, with Martell blood tied to the Lannister dynasty, the Seven Kingdoms stood more united than they had in years. But alliances built on politics, not love, carried their own dangers. Arianne had no loyalty to Joffrey. She was no meek and obedient queen. She was a woman who played her own game. And she had not forgotten the blood spilled by House Lannister. Joffrey's reign was not without its challenges. The Iron Islands still plotted rebellion. The North still waited for a moment of weakness. The East still held a Targaryen princess with dragons in her heart. And within his own court, whispers of treachery and ambition never ceased. But Joffrey, raised in the shadow of Tywin Lannister, was prepared for it all. Because power was not given, it was taken. And Joffrey Baratheon, the lion raised by lions, had no intention of letting it slip from his grasp. The first true test of Joffrey's rule came not from an open battlefield, but from the shadows. His marriage to Arianne Martell had brought Dorne into the fold, but it had not erased the Martell hatred for the Lannisters. In the dark corners of Sunspear, secret letters were exchanged, messages sent to distant lands. And in the north, Ned Stark was still watching. Winterfell was quiet, but only on the surface. The North had never forgotten the fate of Brandon and Rickard Stark. It had never forgiven the South for what it had done to them, and now, with a Lannister on the throne, the North whispered of the day they would rise again. But they did not rise yet, because the Starks had learned patience. Instead, they sent quiet riders beyond the wall to the true heir of Winterfell, Jon Snow. At Castle Black, Jon Snow had taken the Black as a brother of the Night's Watch, bound by oaths that kept him from the wars of kings and lords. But the Night's Watch was not blind to the world beyond the wall. And one fateful night, a raven arrived. It carried no sigil, no signature, only a single line written in the hand of Robb Stark. The North remembers. The meaning was clear. The Starks were preparing. They had not forgotten the truth of Joffrey's birth. They had not forgotten the executions, the betrayals, the war that had been delayed but never erased. The North would rise, and they would need a Stark to lead them. Jon Snow was a bastard, but a bastard with Stark blood was still more Stark than the golden-haired king who sat in King's Landing. As Westeros stirred, another power was rising. Daenerys Stormborn had lost her husband, her child, her illusions of peace. But she had gained something far greater, fire and blood. Her dragons grew stronger by the day, and with them, her army. Slavers fell before her, cities burned in her wake. She had built an empire not of politics, but of strength, and she had set her eyes on Westeros. Joffrey had not been blind to her rise. Unlike Robert before him, he did not laugh at the idea of a girl with dragons. He did not ignore the threat that brewed across the sea. Instead, he prepared. The royal fleet was expanded. Spies were sent across the narrow sea. Alliances were secured with the free cities, ensuring that should Daenerys attempt to cross, she would find more than just the waves standing in her way. But even the strongest walls could not keep out the storm forever. Daenerys was coming, and she was bringing dragons. The war did not begin with trumpets. It began with silence. A single Lannister patrol was found dead on the King's Road, their throats slit, their bodies stripped of armor and gold. Then another, and another. The North had risen. Robb Stark, now hardened by years of quiet preparation, led the charge. Winterfell had been reforged into a true fortress, and the bannermen of the North had sworn their loyalty once more. But Joffrey was no fool. Before Robb's forces could even reach the neck, the armies of House Lannister moved, not led by a reckless boy like before, but by a man forged in Tywin's image, Joffrey himself. When Joffrey rode into battle, he did not do so in golden armor. He did not drape himself in robes of silk and sit atop a horse surrounded by shields of gold. He wore blackened steel, a crimson cloak, and a crown of iron, and he did not fight from the safety of the rear. The first battle between the North and the Crown was fought in the Riverlands, near the ruins of Harrenhal. Robb Stark was a brilliant commander, but Joffrey was ruthless. There were no games of honor, no offers of peace. The Lannisters struck first, burning crops, poisoning wells, cutting down entire villages suspected of harboring Northern sympathizers. The Riverlands bled. And when Robb finally met Joffrey on the battlefield, he found himself facing not a spoiled child, but a man who had been raised to rule with an iron fist. The battle raged for hours. The wolves of the North clashed with the lions of the South, and for the first time in history, Joffrey fought not as a boy, but as a true king. And he did not flinch. The North fought with fury, but the Lannisters fought with precision. Robb Stark, The king in the north fell beneath the weight of 1,000 swords. His banners burned, his men fled. The rebellion had ended before it had even begun. With Robb dead, the north fell into chaos. Sansa Stark, still in King's Landing, was no longer a captive. She was a tool, a trophy to be used. She was wed to a Lannister, not Tyrion, Joffrey, a queen made of ice and fire, a wolf chained in a golden cage. But even cages could be broken, because deep beyond the wall, another Stark still lived, and Jon Snow would not forget what had been done. With the north crushed, Joffrey turned his eyes southward. He was the king of a united realm, feared and respected. But across the sea, the Dragon Queen had not forgotten her birthright. And when Daenerys Targaryen finally set sail for Westeros, she did not come with banners and empty words. She came with fire, with dragons, with vengeance. The war for the Iron Throne had only just begun. The sky over Dragonstone was red with fire. The Targaryen fleet had landed. Thousands of unsullied Dothraki screamers and Westerosi exiles flooded the beaches. The banners of House Targaryen, black and crimson, flapped in the coastal winds, and above them, in the clouds, 3 dragons circled. Daenerys had arrived. Joffrey Baratheon, first of his name, knew this day would come. The war against the north had hardened him, sharpened him. He had become a ruler not just feared but obeyed. Yet even he knew that this battle would be different. For the first time, he was facing an enemy he could not outmaneuver with gold and steel alone. He was facing fire and blood. Joffrey was no fool. He had known for years that Daenerys was coming. King's Landing had been fortified beyond recognition. The city walls had been reinforced with scorpions, massive ballistae designed to pierce dragonhide. The royal fleet had been expanded, ensuring that the Blackwater Bay would not fall easily. And more than that, he had alliances. Euron Greyjoy had been promised the riches of the world if he destroyed the Targaryen fleet. The Golden Company, the most elite mercenaries in Essos, had been bought with Lannister gold. The Reach, long tied to House Tyrell, was now loyal to the throne through marriages and careful manipulation. Joffrey did not wait for Daenerys to strike first. Instead, he sent a message, a single raven. Come and take it, if you dare. The first battle between Joffrey and Daenerys was not fought in King's Landing, but in the Reach. Daenerys had landed in Dragonstone, but she could not march directly to the capital, not without securing the lands in between. Her armies moved south, seizing towns and strongholds with little resistance. Many lords, still loyal to the memory of House Targaryen, opened their gates willingly. But Joffrey had been prepared. When the Targaryen army reached the fields of Ashford, they found the Golden Company waiting. 20,000 hardened mercenaries, trained killers with no loyalty except to gold. And beside them, the Lannister legions, commanded by none other than Jaime Lannister himself. It was a battle that would be remembered for centuries. The unsullied, disciplined and fearless, clashed against the Golden Company. The Dothraki, wild and relentless, stormed the Lannister lines. And then the sky turned black with wings. Drogon, Rhaegal, Viserion. The dragons descended, breathing fire upon the battlefield. Soldiers screamed as they burned alive, metal melting against their flesh. The Golden Company broke. The Lannisters scattered. For the first time in his life, Joffrey tasted true fear. But he did not run, because he had one last move to play. Joffrey knew that fire alone would not win the war. So he let Daenerys take the Reach. He let her march forward, believing that victory was within her grasp. And when her army finally reached the walls of King's Landing, she found something waiting for her. A trap. Thousands of civilians had been brought inside the Red Keep. Men, women, children, all hostages to the throne. Joffrey stood upon the battlements, his golden crown shining in the torchlight, and he made his final move. "Burn the city," Daenerys commanded. Her blood was hot, her fury unchained. She had watched her people die in the fields, had watched Joffrey's men poison wells and slaughter innocents in their retreat. She would not be merciful. She would end this war in Dragonfire. But as Drogon rose into the sky, ready to unleash hell upon King's Landing, Joffrey stepped forward, and he held up his hand, a hand that held the rope tied to 100 barrels of wildfire. "If you burn my city, "I'll burn it first," he said, his voice calm, steady. Daenerys hesitated. Joffrey had filled the Red Keep with wildfire. Aerys Targaryen's greatest weapon, now turned against his own daughter. If she attacked, if she let Drogon unleash his flames, she would not be the Queen of Ashes. She would be the Queen of Nothing, and Joffrey would die knowing he had taken her victory with him. For the first time, Daenerys realized she was not fighting a fool. She was fighting a monster of her own making. The city held its breath. The world held its breath. Daenerys looked at the people below, innocent people, and she realized Joffrey had made her into the villain. If she burned them all, she would be no better than the Mad King. And so, she did the one thing Joffrey had never expected. She turned. She turned her dragons away, and in doing so, she lost the war. Joffrey did not need to win on the battlefield. He had won with fear. He had shown Daenerys that her fire meant nothing if she could not bring herself to use it. She fled, retreating back across the sea. The Targaryen dream of reclaiming Westeros had ended, not with a final battle, but with the knowledge that the throne was beyond her reach. And Joffrey, the Lion King, had won. His reign would be long. His rule would be feared. And in the end, it was not dragons or armies that had secured his crown. It was his ruthlessness. It was his willingness to do what no one else dared. It was the one thing that had made him the most dangerous king Westeros had ever known. He had no honor. He had no mercy. And that was why he would rule forever. The war was over. The throne belonged to Joffrey Baratheon, not because of his name, not because of his right, but because he had taken it. The realm would never love him, but they would never dare to defy him, because love was fleeting. But fear lasts forever.